Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Remote Rundown, where we're talking to three of our Offit Kurman Labor and Employment attorneys about relevant and meaningful information for employers, business owners throughout the area, what they should be thinking about, what they should know about as it relates to the current COVID-19 crisis. So employers have been in crisis mode for weeks. Now there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel, or at least a glimmer of hope. On both federal and state levels, there's been conversation about loosening restrictions and eventually and gradually reopening and getting back to work. What does that look like, and what should employers know and be thinking about as they prepare to reopen?
Well, I think that can look like a lot of things. I think one thing we're getting a sense of already is that it's probably going to happen in phases. So that's what governments have been talking about, is releasing businesses, getting back to normal in phases. And I think for employers, it's going to be something similar. Just because you've been let out of the starting blocks doesn't mean you're going to go back to the way you were operating before COVID-19. It's going to be a ramp up process, just like anyone else.
Yeah, and I think that looks different for certain businesses because some businesses are operating with minimal operations and are going to have to plan to bring on more employees back to work, while other companies haven't even gone back yet. So it's how do we get those initial employees back in the door and make sure that they feel safe while doing it.
Yeah, and I've already been getting questions just this week from employers on how to bring back people they had temporarily laid off. So, a couple of weeks ago, we were helping employers with their layoffs and how to communicate with employees and what to do. And now I'm starting to get the calls of, how do I start bringing people back? What if they don't want to come back? What if some want to come back? And then once they come back, what do I do to keep them safe and make sure that they have an understanding? Because a lot of these employees, their jobs have changed since they've been out. So as this phased approach and this ramp up starts, they might not be coming back to a job that looks identical to the one that they left, whether it be they're going to still be working remotely, or whether they're going to be at location sometimes, at home sometimes, and then what it's going to look like to keep them safe if they are on location.
So obviously, health is top of mind with everybody, with the employers and the employees as they start thinking about going back to work. What will they have to do, or what would you recommend that they do to ensure that the health and safety of their employees as they gradually come back to work?
I think there's a couple of things to look at there. I don't think there's anything yet mandated that they have to do other than continue to comply with social distancing and good hand washing etiquette and things like that. But for those that are in operation, a lot of employers have chosen to take temperatures and ask symptom-related questions before employees enter the workplace. And some things that are important. Well, one funny thing about that is it's important to think about what thermometer you're using. I heard one client say that they had started using oral thermometers and that made their employees really uncomfortable. So they've gone to the forehead scanning temperature thermometer, and that seemed to make everybody feel a lot more comfortable. And then if you're choosing to do these things, you have to remember that you're allowed to under the law, but you need to make sure if you're logging it that you're keeping all this information confidential and in compliance with state and federal laws.
Well, and I would add to that, I think that's good advice. I just know that, we're all in Maryland. Pennsylvania does have certain requirements. The governor there entered an executive order that does have specific requirements about what you can and can't do in the workplace. And that's probably a pretty decent guide for, at least here in Maryland, what best practices might be, if not something Governor Hogan might order as well.
And what about the physical office itself? Do you think the offices are going to have to get more hand sanitizer dispensers? Are they going to be moving furniture around? What's been the conversation about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think employers are going to have to think about all of those things and put policies in place that of what kind of behavior people should be exhibiting in the workplace when they come back. So I know one question I got from a client recently is their kitchen, right? A lot of offices have a joint kitchen where everyone can go and make coffee and congregate and those kinds of things. So you'll have, employers are going to have to really consider, well, what should I do with that break room or that kitchen, or, to make sure that you're keeping employees safe, that people aren't congregating in small spaces, that people aren't all reaching into a common snack bag, things that normally might happen in an office. So I think even beyond furniture, there's all these pieces that are not insignificant but seem small that employers are going to have to consider, develop policies around, and communicate with their employees so that their employees feel safe and so that their employees know what's expected and what to do while they're on site.
Well, and getting rid of the common snack or the tub of pretzels is probably just good advice, regardless of COVID.
Yeah.
They're just disgusting. No one should have that.
Exactly.
And with that, I think it's important to try and plan this out, because these guidances and what we're supposed to do to keep everyone healthy is going to probably continue for a while. So even estimating the cost that it's going to take you, and that might impact what you choose to do, like surgical face masks versus N95. Are we going to, how many hand sanitizing stations are we going to have? How often do we need a deep clean? How much does that cost versus regular janitorial services? So all of that is going to have to be budgeted in as we move forward.
And that's even, that's kind of what the Pennsylvania order is getting at, is requiring employers to provide face masks to employees, requiring hand washing breaks, requiring cleaning and sanitizing. So just from a practical matter, like I know if I want to order something that I would typically order, it takes 2 or 3 times longer to get to me right now. And things like face masks and sanitizers, I mean, those are in high demand. So if you're thinking about returning to the office, even though it might be, the beginning of June, by the time this actually happens in large scale, you should probably be thinking about ordering supplies and the things you're going to need now. It's not like we're going to get to June and everything's going to be like it was in January.
So you guys have mentioned mandates, and Russell, you talked a little bit about Pennsylvania. Our Maryland governor is holding his press conference, I believe, tomorrow, Friday, April 24th, where I think he's going to lay out the plan for, what getting back to work or getting back to the office looks like. What might you expect to be a part of that plan, and will there be requests or requirements related to some of the things you've spoken about, including, coming back in shifts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're likely to get some degree of requirement. I mean, obviously, we're required to have non-essential businesses closed to the public right now. But I mean, I think we're going to see things like, whether they're required or just pretty obviously good practice, we're going to see things like working in shifts, so to minimize the number of people in the office. We're going to see things like the mandatory breaks, the masks being requirements, those sorts of things. But I also think we're going to see, chairs removed from common areas. So whether it's the kitchen or the conference room, I think we're going to have chairs removed so people can't, you can't have too many people in those rooms, and they're going to be staggered, so they're 6 feet apart and not across the table. I mean, so from each other. So we're going to see a lot of, I think, very granular detail in terms of what the best practices are moving forward.
Will there be any? Go ahead, Sarah.
I would say, as far as whether things are going to be required or recommended, I think that there's going to be some broader requirements, kind of like there has been now, like as far as numbers of people gathering in one space and how much space should be between people and things like that. But it is going to be left to employers to figure out some of the softer details as it relates to their particular workspace, their industry, and figuring out, what's going to be the best practice for their office to be compliant and also to just be as safe as possible.
Great. I think that pretty much wraps it up. I'd like to give each of you a chance for a parting shot, and then I have one last trivia question sort of at the end. So we'll start with Sarah. Any parting takeaways?
Yeah, just be thinking to the future here. As you said, seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's going to be a lot of ramp up plans to think about, and it's get excited a little bit maybe, and start thinking ahead and thinking of the future.
Veronica?
I'll just throw one more tip out there, or something to think about as you start to reopen, but training your employees to be able to identify symptoms and encourage them to report those to management if they think someone might be sick, as opposed to confronting their peers. I mean, that might even go into training your supervisors to be even more detailed oriented about things like that. So those are just other things to consider as we move forward.
Russell?
Yeah, this week's tip will be a little bit more practical. As you consider rehiring employees, and then once you have employees back, you have to be very conscious of not discriminating in an unlawful manner about the employees you decide to bring back. And then once they're back, and people are going to have all sorts of special requests about continuing to work remotely and wanting to create their own schedules, that's another opportunity. Anytime you treat people differently, you create a risk of a potential claim for discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be very conscious, very thoughtful about how this process goes. And unlike a lot of things, like with termination, we're used to a familiar pattern for insulating against that. In this kind of massive ramp up and remote work situation, this is new, this is different, and you're really gonna have to put some thought and hopefully talk to legal counsel to guide you through that process, because there's really a lot of pitfalls there that you might not even be thinking about.
Okay, this is a quick one. It's a very short answer for each of you. What do you miss most about not being at work at Offit Kurman in the Baltimore office? We'll start with Russell. What do you miss most?
Thanks for starting with me so I can take the easy answer. My colleagues, seeing you guys face to face.
Okay. Veronica, what do you miss most?
My mega desk. We have huge wraparound desks and took that for granted.
Good, really good answer. Sarah?
The communal pretzel jar. No.
Yeah, well, I think you've seen the last of the communal pretzel jar, right? Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks.